Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Blackburn from District Administration, and welcome to our webinar here today, which is entitled Budget Pressures Rising, 3 Practical Shifts to Support Attendance and Student Access, which is all brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor with us here today, EverDriven. Now for some quick housekeeping items before we get to the main event. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. So as you can see on your screen, if your audio cuts out or the slides freeze at any time, just refreshing your screen should fix the issue. So again, any audio issues, any video issues, just refreshing your screen should fix the issue. At the end of our main presentation today, there will be a live Q&A with our panelists here. You can submit your questions below. You can do that via the red Ask question box. It's the one with the question mark and the chat bubbles, and you can do that anytime during the event. After the live Q&A at the very end, a post-event survey will launch on your screen automatically. But if you need to jump off early for whatever reason, we know you have very busy schedules. But if you do need to jump off, just please click on the survey button at the bottom of your screen before you jump off. It's the pink box with the checklist. A few other things also at the bottom of your screen. There's a blue box with a paperclip. There's some great resources in there, including a 2026-27 budget survey on the state of student transportation, among other things. So again, click that at any time during the event for that. And lastly, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who's here today, everyone who registered, all of you will receive an email tomorrow from us at DA with a link to the slides as well as the on-demand recording. So look out for that in your inboxes, everyone. And now it is my pleasure to pass things off to today's moderator, who will start things off and introduce our guest speakers. And our moderator today is Courtney Pilata, who is Chief Marketing Officer at EverDriven. Courtney, it's great to have you with us. You may now begin.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, everybody, for attending today. I know days are incredibly busy, especially this time of the school year. So first, I'm going to start with thanking our presenters, Alex, Carlos, and Jasmine, for making time to be a part of this discussion today, and also to every one of you who's taken time out of your busy work days to hopefully participate in a session where our goal is to impart some knowledge and give you a couple tips and learn a few things. So EverDriven has been part of a couple of DA sessions over the course of the past few months where we've talked a lot about chronic absenteeism and how to drive up attendance and how do you align those things to transportation, or how does transportation have an impact? Today, we're going to talk a little bit about budget pressures rising and how do districts at the leadership level, as well as in every function, start to think about how attendance and access should be considered as part of the overall plan. And even when you may constantly be making trade-offs, right? How do I meet the needs of what my district expects next year while also ensuring that every student has access to the school day? We're going to talk a little bit about that. So what you can expect to hear is how do transportation leaders really think about working cross-functionally to ensure attendance and make sure that plans are put in place for a really successful school start and school year. So with that, let's introduce our speakers. So we have 3 panelists here today. You can see Jasmine Ware, who's the operations supervisor at the Garland Independent School District, also a member of our customer advisory board, has a ton to share relative to the way in which Garland thinks about transportation. Carlos Chicas, who is the executive director of operations transportation at the Capistrano Unified School District. Carlos has been working with EverDriven far longer than my very short tenure here. Very happy to have his perspective today. And Alex Meerbrook, who is a senior sales director at EverDriven, likewise has been in this space for an incredibly long time, talks with districts across this country on a very regular basis. So with that is my overall intro, but I would love for each of our presenters to say a little bit of something about themselves. So Jasmine, I'll go to you first. Tell us a little bit about you and your background. Well, we can't hear you, Jasmine. Perfect. Go ahead. No. All right, while you figure that out, we'll go to Carlos first. How about Carlos? We would love for you to give an intro and we'll figure out the audio. Wait, I don't hear you either, Carlos. You hear, does it, maybe I'm gonna ask my co-presenters. Do other people hear Carlos?
No, I do not.
Okay.
How about now?
There we go.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
There you go. Okay.
Good. Technical issues. Welcome everybody. Thank you, Courtney, and I'm glad to be here today. I'm in Capistrano Unified. That's Southern Orange County. We are the 10th largest district in California. Thousands of districts in California, but we do operate a cross section over quite a large square foot area in square miles, over 240 square miles in our area. So hoping to share some things from a leadership perspective, and excited to talk about some of the things we're going to cover today.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlos. We're excited to hear a couple things, so it's going to be great. Jasmine, do you want to, let's see how we'll do like a real-time audio test. How's it going now? No. Funny thing. Well, why don't we do this? Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, Jasmine, if you'd like it, because I know you switched to earbuds earlier, if you go to the top of your screen, there's that audio button. There should be a downward arrow. If you click on that, you can switch back and forth between different audios. So that might be it. No.
All right. And while I think Jasmine's working on that, why don't we go to Alex for a quick intro?
Yeah, we'll check my audio as well. Can you hear me, Courtney?
We can hear you.
All right, good. So happy to be here as well. My name is Alex Muirbrook. I oversee business development in part for EverDriven. I've been with the company for some time in a number of different markets and areas, different states. My home state is Texas, but I know California and Southern California well, so some connection to Carlos and his district, and I've worked alongside Jazz and her team at Garland ISD for some time, and so I'm hopeful also to provide some context and perspective from the vendor side, if you will, or what we're seeing at EverDriven and in my conversations with districts all over, relevant to budgets and absenteeism and supporting transportation success for these students. So thank you, Courtney.
Awesome. Great. We're so glad you're here. Now, you guys, 3 could be a charm, and if not, we'll go on to topics. Jasmine, let's try your audio. No.
Can you hear me?
I couldn't hear you. It doesn't have that background sound, though.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay, let me switch to my phone.
Okay, cool. All right, so we're gonna move on because we have topics, and Jasmine's gonna comment in on the next topic anyway, so she has a second. I will offer the comment that anybody who has run a web event since, I'll be dating myself, the year 2000, it is literally impossible not to have something go awry. Like, I've just never seen it happen. There's always a thing. So we're just going to kind of go with that. And thanks everybody for your patience. So let's talk a little bit about what budget pressure is rising, even if district outlooks vary. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means in a second. But if you're sitting here today, let's assume that maybe 2 out of 3 school districts today are thinking about, sorry, I haven't moved on, how you do the most. I don't want to say more with less. How do you meet the changing needs of your district in any given school year when many districts are faced with either coming into the school year with the same budget, coming into the school year with a smaller budget, needing to flex to adjust to enrollment changes, the reality of what school districts deal with every day, which is change is a guarantee. And Tim, who is a partner of Jasmine's over at Garland, said very appropriately, prepare and pivot. How do you do the thing, which is how do you show up really prepared and how do you pivot when you need to? So knowing that these outlooks kind of vary, that expectations on district leaders are always rising, and that this school year is really an opportunity for clear priorities, really strong justifications, and close connection to outcomes, how do people think about this? So first I'm going to go to Carlos, which is when you start to think about planning for next year, what is really important for you to understand about budget pressure and how it can affect attendance, costs, and access?
Absolutely. California is not the exception. We are facing a critical crisis in the state when it comes to educational budgets. As you think about the how you can adjust and pivot, as you mentioned before, I think as a transportation leader, it's important to engage district leadership. And if you're on the other end, if you're maybe an assistant superintendent or a CBO, make sure you engage your transportation director or whoever it might be that's serving that function in your district, because they're going to help you to understand the kind of impacts that will occur if budget decisions are not comprehensive. So there's a direct impact on student access and instructional time, operational decisions that will affect the entire district. So when you make a decision, think about how this is going to affect attendance, how it's going to affect equity of access, because oftentimes those that are affected the most are students that are maybe live farther away from campuses, are special ed students, homeless students, foster youth. All of that needs to come into play. But in addition to that, when you're making budget decisions, even in a situation where you have to make some cuts, we need to think about what the long-term effects, because a delayed investment in transportation can create higher long-term costs. We're talking about your fleet. We're talking about retaining your drivers and making sure you make good decisions when it has to do with your partners. All of these things are affected when you make critical budget decisions, and they can affect student learning, which is at the core of our function.
Yeah, and I know you're going to share some examples of exactly maybe what that's meant for you as you start to think about next year as we move on to some of our additional kind of tips and learning section. But I think it is so, you make such an important point, Carlos, that, it's true in my world in marketing. Sometimes a decision on paper and a decision in execution are drastically different. And sometimes when you think about the modifications you may need to make at a district level, the downstream impact of the thing and making sure that that doesn't impact a student's ability to actually get to or participate in their education is really, really important. And understanding what those dependencies are early so that districts aren't finding themselves surprised. There's much more to it than the plan. It's the plan plus the execution. So we'll talk a little bit about that and appreciate that perspective. So what does it mean? We'll give a little bit of background here. So when we talk about budget expectations being mixed, but the pressure being real, we recently surveyed 200 districts throughout this country, school districts of all sizes, very large urban districts, very large suburban districts, small rural districts, you name it. And what we saw, which although at first you're going like, oh, wow, a third, when you think about 2/3 of districts saying that they're going to stay flat or expect a decrease, what we've heard from a lot of our transportation director partners is that actually feels like a decrease, because if you come into the school year and you're going, you had $5, you now have $5, but I also need you to figure out how to bring the students that used to be at this elementary school to these other elementary schools, or you need to bring in out of district students who previously were not part of the network. It presents a lot of velocity and change with a footprint that feels less, because you're not really getting more to do more kind of thing. So there's all sorts of opportunity for optimization, and we're going to talk about that here. But maybe first on this, I'll go to Alex, which is like, you're meeting with districts every day. You've been doing that for a really long time. How do you think leaders are thinking differently about transportation today when budgets are kind of veering more towards flat or shrinking than they are some sort of dramatic increase?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Carlos touched on this, when he was speaking just a minute ago as well, and that, you know, a lot of the decisions that I'm seeing these folks make, they're really considering some of the long term or downstream effects, right? If we're looking here that over 2/3 of districts either expect a flat budget or a decrease, well, that doesn't really take into consideration that statistic or metric that you may be getting more students with the same or a smaller budget, or you may have more out of district McKinney-Vento eligible students or students with an IEP who need out of district transport to a magnet site or a specialty school. And these are areas that can be difficult as far as the budget goes to accommodate. Your budget hasn't changed or it's decreased, yet you still need to do that. And so what I'm seeing a lot of our district partners and many district partners across the country do is really consider, you know, what is the priority here and how do we optimize and how do we get the most efficient relative to this budget that we've got to work with or lack thereof, right? And, you know, the previous slide mentioned this year will require stronger justification. And I was going to ask Carlos too. I mean, you were talking earlier on the downstream effect of some of these decisions and long-term transportation and whatnot. And what came to mind for me when you were saying that, and especially on this slide when it comes to budget is are you noticing that you have to make stronger justifications for like specialty students or populations to prioritize relative to the budget here? Because that's a lot of what I'm seeing in other places as well, that we've really got to prioritize and justify what matters the most and then fill in as efficiently as possible after. Like, does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And those students you speak about often, you know, we are mandated to provide services for them. So as we continue to provide services for them, how do we make sure that we maintain you know, services for other students that are sustainable and aligned with our district priorities? And so you look at different ways. How can I do this, right? And to Courtney's point, even if you continue with the same budget that you had in prior year, that actually means that your budget's decreased because everything else is going up.
Because your needs have changed. Yeah.
Absolutely, needs change, costs continue to increase, whether it's labor or whatever that might be. And students keep coming into the district, right? And students with maybe special needs, they continue, and that's something that's growing nationwide, identifying these types of students. So you need to look at, like, how am I going to optimize my routes, bell schedule alignments, maybe tiered routing and service models, right? Think outside the box. It's not always the yellow bus. You may need some support to make sure that you're doing more with less. And those are questions you have to ask yourself now, right? We're thinking of 27, 28, 26, 27. Ask those questions now. Find some comprehensive solutions, and then you're better suited as you plan ahead.
Makes perfect sense. Not hard. I mean, not easy, but makes absolutely a lot of sense. How do you think about it? You guys, I'm going to move to the next slide here, which is like, why? Let's talk about the state of the state. I don't need to tell this team. I'm only going to share what we found, which is what is really driving decreases or flat budgets in some districts. And we're going to have examples of all of these things today, which are, I'll go a little bit out of order. Declining enrollment. You have cities in this country that are seeing surges in enrollment. You have cities who are seeing significant declines in enrollment. You're seeing each of you needing to make decisions about how to operate within the school footprint that you have. You're seeing, a sort of secondary point is we see that state and federal funding reductions are a reality. And certainly we're well out of the time frame when ESSER funding was something that was a sort of a trusted stream for districts for some period of time. And also there are district-wide budget cuts. We've got a rise in operational costs. In a conversation that we had a couple weeks ago with Jasmine and her colleague Tim, we talked about a very specific example around right now rising gas prices. So it makes it harder to operate, and it's a transportation budget that you sort of have to find that you weren't really anticipating. So something has to give. What's the flip side in that scenario? There's all sorts of innovation happening in this space. Carlos just talked about routing and driving efficiency. There's tech that exists to help solve those sorts of problems. So it's not all that you have only the same set of tools in your kit. In fact, I think we're going to see examples today of leaders making sure you have all the right tools to be responsive. But there are challenges and opportunities that need to be considered based on what we know. So that is maybe my 2 cents on this. But I would say to Carlos, as you're talking to an audience of people who have different district leading roles, how can transportation leaders make sure attendance, access, and service quality stay part of the broader team discussion?
Yeah, and you made some good points. There's all kinds of factors that are leading to budget crisis. In our particular district, it's kind of a double whammy. We've got the state funding that is slashed, and then on top of that, we have declining enrollment. And when that happens, you're often faced with some really difficult decisions, like having to close schools. So this summer, we're facing that. We're facing the closure of 2 of our elementary schools, and that's hard. The conversations are hard. There's all kinds of the political impacts with our board, and so when that happens, sometimes it's easy to kind of lose focus, because now you have to make some decisions. And don't forget that our conversations always have to be student-centered. And I know everybody that's here, that's what we do. But transportation is part of that, right? You're closing the school. Now you have students that are going to that live further away from now what becomes their new home school. So you have to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to get those kids there? How do we do this? Our budgets remain flat, but those conversations need to happen when you are actually considering that school closure, so that kind of impact, what's going to end up happening is there's going to be a cost associated with that. How are we going to get this done, even in these trying times? So when you're doing that, whether you're a district leader or a transportation leader, you want to talk about the kinds of things that you have to bring to the table, and those are metrics. That's real data that you need to share. Attendance correlations. What will happen if we don't provide this service? The trends in ridership. What is that going to look like if we all of a sudden just don't provide the service, and we have now this changing landscape in the district? So being proactive, participating early in those discussions, whether it's about boundary changes, program expansions, school consolidations, you want to be part of that conversation. And if you're part of the conversation already, make sure that transportation is part of this conversation, collaborating closely with cross-departmentally, ed services, special education, human resources, with site administrators. Those conversations are critical. You don't want to be faced with, oh, now we have to decide this, and it's after the fact. So we advocate for the operational needs, but also for equitable student access, and make sure there's continuity of learning opportunities across the district when you're faced with these kind of decisions.
They seem like really important questions to be asking now. And I think, Carlos, you brought up a really good point. You said the word a couple of times. The conversation should be happening now, which is the dialogue, the understanding, the probing around, tell me what the expectation is, the response in terms of what's feasible. I think that it's a natural transition over to Jasmine to talk a little bit about operationally, Jasmine. What should district leaders really understand in a model like this, where do more with less, kind of what does it really look like day to day, sort of taking that down a level and telling us through your lens what that means? Oh, no.
I might be able to help here because I've worked with Jazz so long, Courtney, and Jazz, feel free to,
okay,
if your audio does ping on, just interrupt me. But I can tell you from my perspective, working with Jasmine for several years at Garland ISD, some of the what do more with less or do the most with what you have looks like, and what I've seen her do. If you're looking at this list over here on the slide, you're looking at things like controlling costs, addressing driver shortage, serving special education, medically fragile students, and McKinney-Vento students. I know that something Garland ISD does really well is when they have out of district McKinney-Vento students or those with an IEP but are out of district, that they may need to split or share with a neighbor district, given the federal mandate for McKinney-Vento eligible students that is transport to their school of origin. I've observed Jazz and folks at her district really coordinate quite well with all the other neighbor districts, whether that's at the transportation level or cross-functionally with the social workers or McKinney-Vento liaisons and staff, to get from them and ascertain information like, what are the bell times at the site? Because your student is coming to our school in the afternoon, but we're splitting that transportation. They're going to your site in the morning. Do they need to be there early for breakfast? Things like that. What time do they release? What vendor are you using if you're outsourcing? Or if you're using a bus, what might we expect as far as pickup drop-off goes to coordinate with parent guardian? All of these little parts of coordination at this level, the McKinney-Vento level, this matters because now you're not missing pickups. Now you're not turning back and charging for another trip or paying a driver overtime to circle back for a trip that was out of route. The student is being picked up and taken to school on time. Now we know that obviously we're increasing their educational outcomes by getting them there. But of course, also when it comes to budget, there's no funding for these students if they're not in the actual classroom, right? They can't get to the classroom if they can't physically get to the classroom, right? And so I've noticed doing the most with what you have or doing more with less, a couple different ways to phrase that. I've observed this over the years from Jasmine and team at Garland, and controlling costs while maintaining service levels. Like, what's in the best interest of this student? Is it to put them on a vehicle for an hour and a half one way because that's their school of origin? Or is there a conversation we should have with perhaps the rest of the staff at the federal programs or McKinney-Vento level? Let us know how we ought to proceed here. And so, Jazz, I don't know if your audio is back working again. And if it's not, then you'll have to forgive me if I have misquoted you here. But these are some things that I've observed Jasmine and her team and many others do quite well. And it's cut costs and driven efficiency.
No,
Reading your lips, and you said you nailed it perfectly, Alex.
I
Couldn't have
see a
said it
head
better
nod.
myself.
There's a head nod like this, not like that. So that's good. I know Stephen is working with Jasmine to see if he can help her connect via phone because
Courtney, if I could just piggyback on some of the things that Alex said, particularly like the conversation around specialized transportation. And I mentioned it earlier, but we all know that those demands continue to grow, whether it's students with special education needs, that requires individualized planning for that student, and it's a compliance issue, right? The same thing with McKinney-Vento. It's really important. It's necessary for these kids that are less privileged. They want to maintain school stability and continuity. So you can't just reduce these services. They must continue. So what that means is you may have to do some trade-offs and maybe really revisit how you're providing that service. And what Alex said is, I can't stress it enough. You want to make sure that however you're doing that, you're doing it as efficiently as possible. And all these times where we're having to get extra fiscally responsible, it's not like the most comfortable situation we're in, but often it'll produce some kind of out of the box thinking, like, how are we getting this work done? Is it the best way? And what can we trade off? Maybe it means delaying your fleet replacement if you have your own fleet, extending the life cycle of your fleet, right? And then making sure that you're not making a choice that's going to interrupt, disrupt, or we are not providing the service to these specialized students.
Yeah, and Carlos, the specialized students, whether we want to, there are a number of different demographics, populations can fall into that category depending on how any given district or region might define or use that as a representative theme. But like when we talk about let's just take McKinney-Vento eligible students for the sake of this conversation to start with, there may not be a budget at the beginning of the year for out of district McKinney-Vento transport. However, that's a federal mandate. So whether it's in the budget or not, it's going to happen, right? Someone's got to pay for this because it's got to happen to give these students equal access to their school of origin if they're qualified as McKinney-Vento eligible under the MKV Act. And so it can be a tricky thing. I've observed many districts having, and I know we'll get to some of these practical shifts in a moment, Courtney, but I've observed many districts, Carlos, like you were just saying, say, well, hey, this wasn't in the budget, but now we have these handful of families who have moved outside of the district boundary where we don't have a bus route going and they're McKinney-Vento eligible. We've got to get them to their school of origin. So even if they move, still take them to their school ongoing. How are we going to do that? And I've noticed a lot of districts do a number of different things, but the trade-off is real. Sometimes it's districts have to move funding from one budget or department to another, kind of reallocate whatever you need to do. But the reality is we're going to transport them, right? It's a mandate. And so I don't know, Carlos, if you have seen it differently or observed anything otherwise, but one way or another, it's got to get done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why when we go back to those strategic planning conversations, right? So if you are on the transportation side, make sure you're at the table. If you're on the district leadership side making these decisions, make sure you're including those folks at the table.
Yeah, it's a very natural transition, which is, I think, part of what we wanted to talk about today is what are some practical shifts? And when we are all talking about practical, a lot of this is point of reference, like what are you doing within your district today? And Carlos gave several examples here, and Alex gave several examples on behalf of Jasmine relative to the way that Garland is thinking about this. What are the types of changes you need to facilitate so that decisions are being made sooner rather than later? So we'll move kind of from the state of the state and hopefully have set the table with some examples that feel relevant to our participants today. And let's talk a little bit about what are some practical shifts districts can make now. And to that end, our panelists today are going to talk about practical shifts they are making right now and some real questions they're thinking about at the district level. So from a district leadership standpoint, Carlos, tell me a little bit more, are the conversations you're referencing, is the timing now? Was the timing 2 months ago? Is the timing July? Like, is this the right time for these conversations relative to partnering district goals with access and transportation? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, we're in May, right? So depending on when your school year starts, in our district, our school year, the 26-27 school year will begin in the third week of August. So it's probably a little late at this point, but better late than never. I think that you should be having these conversations once one school year begins. You need to start planning for the next one. Right? That's really the kind of timeline you should give yourself. But regardless of that, I think all of these conversations listed on these slides are the right conversations, right? Making sure you're aligning your transportation operation with student access. It's critical. You're supporting the structure of time. You're supporting equity for all students, helping reduce barriers for students that are maybe vulnerable. All of these conversations need to happen. This is the kind of the why for everything. And when you kind of have that as a foundation, then I think you can get people to start talking about it earlier rather than later. And absolutely, those conversations should be happening and should have happened already for the following school year when you're thinking about this year. But the earlier, the better. I think that allows you and gives you a chance to do what Tim at Garland kind of mentioned when we were planning for this. It allows you to pivot if you need to, rather than only being reactive as school is beginning. That is the recipe to be wasteful with funds, right? And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Carlos, too, and I too wanted to kind of echo kind of what Tim from Garland, who couldn't make it today, but had shared with us too. Like you mentioned, being reactive can be tricky. Like any good plan, proactivity and preparedness, a plan in advance is kind of coming quite useful. But being proactive and identifying where transportation directly affects student access and support and attendance And it could be quite complex. Or I've seen some districts make it real simple. Some large metropolitan, real inner city districts sharing with us on our end, hey, these areas of students who attend these schools and these demographics, absenteeism is quite bad to this percentage point, right? And we've identified that transportation or just them getting to school is a huge barrier as to why. And then they kind of also identify here are a lot of the shelters in the region for those who are displaced. They tend to be coming from or transient in nature and moving to and from these areas into these schools. Sharing that with either your kind of your fleet manager or your actual transportation routers folks, or any vendor that you're outsourcing, if you are outsourcing to, can be helpful so they can create a proactive routing plan as well to say, maybe we need to shift resources this way. Sometimes it is as simple as that, and changing the route, whether it's a bus route or, again, some folks who choose to outsource, like sharing that information in advance proactively, right? So you can get on top of that. And that way you're not reacting halfway through the year to a more efficient plan where you've been inefficient, which we know means expensive all the while halfway through the year, right? And so those are some perhaps obvious or easy, apparent, but effective solutions I've observed some large districts brainstorm over the past year or so.
Yeah, is I think very applicable, meaning like sometimes doing the things that feel obvious and are right in front of you. Well, like, hey, you know what, this feels like a lot of change and you are an MKV liaison. How do I make sure that I'm not surprising my counterpart with expectations for September or something like this? Or like, you know, even on the Everdriven side of things, we see probably a dozen requests today from caregivers who are in a housing unstable situation and looking to figure out what the resources available to them are, you know? And so it's like, you imagine there's velocity and volatility there that then comes to the district, presents a lot of change. How do districts stay ahead of that? Jasmine, any comments that you would want to offer? Because I know now that your audio's working and we're very happy to talk with you. Anything else you'd want to share on this topic?
I mean, everything that has been shared has been great. What I've been able to hear, I do apologize for the technical difficulties. I told Tim I needed a laptop. But yeah, you know, my goal is every student every day, work hard or not smarter. We have to be creative with the resources we have, and everybody knows things are constantly changing. And so, again, like Carlos said, we're in the business. We're here for the kids, and that's we're in the business of getting them to and from. And, you know, we want to provide that customer service of getting them to and from school on time to make sure they're there for the attendance, and they are our future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is such an important point, which is at the end of the day, operationally, it is about the access and making sure that that is available. I think Carlos also used the word, which is like it's equitable and available to everyone, irrespective of your whatever your situation is.
Can I ask Jazz a question, Courtney? And even Carlos as well, because I've observed this and I think there's something to it. How often, Jazz, does Garland ISD update and or change bus routes throughout the year? Is it once a week, twice a week? Like if you need to make a change to a bus route, typically, is there a format or a cadence for that?
Yeah, so we typically don't at the beginning of the school year just because there's so many,
right.
You know, things, kids enrolling, changes happening, moving campuses or whatnot. But we're updating routes Labor Day until this Friday, because our last week of school is next week. But anytime we receive, you know, SPED paperwork, transportation supplement, we're adding or removing from a route or updating their service address. For Gen Ed, anytime a student moves or in or out of the district or moves campuses, we're adding them to a new route. Sometimes it requires to add a new stop or remove a stop. So it's something we do on a daily basis. It just depends on the route and the need.
So it happens daily, or is there a day of the week where the changes would affect?
Typically, it's a daily thing. It just depends, like what's coming in as far as if a student changes their address and they need a bus tomorrow, we're going to try to get them on the route for tomorrow.
And I know every district is different, Carlos. I don't know if it's different for you all, but is it the same for you, or is there like a Tuesdays and Thursdays, or this day of the week, if there are changes, this is when they take effect on the bus?
Yeah, if it's a general education student, a regular mainstream student, then there could be more of a delay, right? We kind of when there's a transportation request, that might take a little longer, and the reason for that is that because we prioritize the other students, right? Special ed students, McKinney-Vento foster kids, that those have to get on the bus as soon as possible, and so there isn't really a specified date. Those are incoming throughout. We have periods of time, and I'm sure Jasmine can appreciate this. Like, we'll start off the school year looking one way, and then during that first month or month and a half, I mean, there is constant flow of changes, and we have to route those kids. So I think you become better at that, and as a district, your teams are really so important that you have good routing teams, good planners, because you start to leave some room for that change, right? So that you can adapt without having necessarily add an extra bus or an extra route, and then also having an extra partner that whoever your partner is for these types of students. It's so important that they can adapt and pivot quickly too, and you can confidently say, okay, we need help with this kid. They have a particular IEP that we can't manage on the yellow bus, or it's a McKinney-Vento that just lives too far outside of our boundary. So you want to have those solutions readily available to you, so you can get those kids to school as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Courtney, I apologize for, but I thought that might help kind of with the next topic here, because some things I was hearing there were leave room for, adapt, pivot, things like that, and I'm hearing proactive terms and preparing and all these things, using the right type of vendor. If you've got a partner, how you plan to use that, making decisions proactively on how to do that in advance will save you money, thus pad the budget a little bit, right? And so I know we're going to get into some of that, Courtney, but that's kind of what I was when Jazz and Carlos were sharing that. That's what I was kind of getting, is these changes are coming all the time. We already know that. If you know it's going to be chaotic and you know what you have to prioritize, then what decisions can you make now to prepare for that?
Yeah, it is. These examples, I think, are incredibly helpful, by the way. And I think I'll offer a comment to our audience today. We talked a little bit about how we might be late to planning. It's a guarantee that we're kind of in the planning mode. Every district that's here today is most likely in the planning mode. If you're hearing some of these examples and you have some questions, we're going to take questions in about 5 minutes here. Please put them in the Q&A, because we're going to go through a couple other examples. But I think when you're in the throes of something, it's sometimes like the point at which you can say, wait a minute, like, I'm dealing with this right now. How could I do this differently? We'll do our very best to answer your questions here, so let's throw them in. Okay, so we talked a little bit about exactly as you described, Alex, which is like being both proactive and prepared, and being establishing sort of norms around partnership now. Let's talk about the tools in the kit, which is like when you think about improving efficiency, and we talk about using the right transportation mode for the need. There have been several highlights made here about where that plays, but tell us a little bit more about how district leaders should be thinking about all of the tools they have to solve for the problem that's in front of them. So which model fits the right need, also meets budget requirements, so that you can derive efficiency in the system. And I'm going to go to Jasmine first on that, which is, what should district leaders understand about how the mode choice really affects efficiency and quality in everyday operations?
So I'll say one thing that we always look at here in Garland is like for McKinney-Vento, the family. We're looking to see what's in the best interest of the student, because we do have families that are coming from, they have an hour or more commute, and obviously putting them on with Everdriven is better than putting them on a school bus if we have a school bus available to do it, because there's not multiple stops. But we always look, at what's best for the student, and, as well as the operation for us here in the house. And that's one thing that Alex and I and the Everdriven team have worked really well together on is, again, how can we make it work with the resources we have and efficiency and using our funds wisely, if you'll say.
Yeah, Jazz, I think I've observed too. Would you say this is fair that, like, depending on the need of the student may, in many cases, or in every case perhaps, determine like what mode of transportation that you as the district provide for them, whether that's a bus, or whether it's a type A bus, or whether it's a white fleet vehicle you have, or if you're outsourcing to a vendor? Because if it's an out of district McKinney-Vento student that you're sharing with a district neighbor who's also using that vendor, well, then maybe that decision is a little bit easier now. Whereas if it's a real long distance, that changes things. If it fits perfectly on an existing bus route, you wouldn't come to your vendor. You would put them on the bus route if it's perfectly, right? So like, I think also that it bears mentioning, as obvious as it may seem, some of those other extra factors drive efficiency on what mode of transportation you use. And so I've observed Garland do that before. Would you say that's accurate as well, Jazz?
Yes, for sure.
And I think, Carlos, you had given an example. Oh, sorry, Jasmine, were you saying something else? No. I think, Carlos, you gave an example earlier about extending the life of your fleet, like the considerations that you have, like tools in your kit, or may have been Alex that said the thing, which is sometimes it's about route consolidation. Sometimes it's about rethinking your vendor contracts. I don't know, Carlos, if there's an example you want to spend a moment on there.
For sure. And to Alex's point, it's true. It's absolutely true that you're not going to seek support from a vendor, an alternative provider, if you can route them on your bus. But even in those cases, there's some exceptions. We have found that depending on if you have to think out of the box, right? If you have an alternative provider that's already transporting some of your special needs students, or maybe they're transporting a McKinney-Vento student, and rather than just automatically putting them on the yellow bus, if it's going to give you more flexibility with your yellow fleet to seek that support from an alternative provider, then that may absolutely be the best approach. And so you have to look at that type of flexibility, using your fleet wisely. And it's just like everything else. Once you have more tools, then you can actually maximize the tools you have. In addition to that, when you're thinking about the mode of transportation, I think to Jasmine's point, we really want to think about the student's needs, and that should be the underlining motivator on how you're going to transport them. So you think about our most impacted kids, the students that are already facing the most barriers and are impacted significantly. When you think about the mode of transportation, you absolutely think about you should have a seat at the table when you're planning for that student's related service, in this case transportation, because their readiness in class as they arrive to school is going to be affected by how their school day began, the time they have in class, making sure the service is consistent, because some of these kids, they really benefit from a different mode of transportation because of just the logistics, and then ultimately having the trust of the family, right? So it's not only the mode of transportation, even though that is the first kind of part of the conversation. Now it's who are you going to have do that, right? Because there's all kinds of other factors when you enter into a relationship with a vendor. Risk mitigation being not the least of the part of the conversation that's important. So all those things factor in on, make a comprehensive, conscientious decision on which mode, and then making sure you're making the right decision on which partner.
Carlos, do you find consistent service from your vendor to be a cost-saving measure or benefit, like overall? Like the idea of consistency, reliability in general, do you find the more consistent and reliable the services,
Absolutely.
that to be a cost-saving factor?
My goal is that I don't want to be hearing from the vendor or from the families that they're servicing. Because if we're having to manage that constantly because of missed pickups, or because now the family's not okay because it's a different driver every day, all those kinds of things can really create a burden on our department. Dispatchers are not having to answer those kind of questions. Transportation supervisors are not having to follow up with that kind of thing. So it's absolutely critical. And absolutely, there's all kinds of, sometimes it's difficult even to put a number on those costs, but they are associated with us because it's often time wasted by our staff.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to go in 2 minutes to questions. And I think we've hit on some of this, which is this plan, prepare, and pivot. But as we sort of wrap up on the tips, okay, we talked a little bit about planning. We talked a little bit about identifying the right mode. We talked a little bit about aligning transportation decisions to outcomes and partnering early. Let's maybe bring this back to some practical examples. I'll start with Carlos, which is from a district leadership standpoint, what does it look like to plan early? You touched on some of this before when we talked about these plans being well underway, so that needs are met before they're costly problems. Is there some additional color you want to offer there?
Sure, absolutely. So early planning, it means that you're including transportation at the beginning of the decision-making process. So that means you're collaborating with everybody that needs to be at the table. Student services, special ed, enrollment and attendance teams, site leadership, all those people are part of the conversations. You may need to narrow down those conversations as you start to make some decisions, but on the outset, they should all be included. That means you're looking at route efficiency, specialized transportation requirements, budget implications, all those things, compliance concerns. You're having those conversations early on. You're beginning to plan for next school year at the beginning of this school year. And, it really, really means that there's good communication throughout the district. You really are having those conversations, not only internally, but also with any contractors or vendors that you're using. That means you're going to make smarter decisions. You're going to have better service outcomes and fewer costly surprises later on, right? Which is exactly what happens if you're having to react in the moment rather than have the conversations as early as possible.
Yeah, very, very practical. Jasmine or Alex, additional comments you'd offer relative to how you're thinking about this today. When you think about planning, what does it look like to plan early?
Yeah. Again, pivot, being proactive, being able to pivot, building in flexibility, and understanding that things are going to change as the year goes on. This is a lot of feedback that I've observed and that I've been given on how we as a vendor can best help our districts, mid-year, end of year, beginning of year with these things. The best way to plan here is to understand that, you've got to be flexible. Things are going to change, and scalability, flexibility. And then, Carlos mentioned a few times thinking outside the box. A route or a route you may have at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year, you may be able to consolidate that route, and you should be open to doing that if the pieces and the students and the logistics and the miles, right, work in such a way you can do that. Double up where you can. Right? You can imagine what it would be if you could cut an entire route, the whole thing out of your system without missing a beat on any OTP or anything like that throughout the year. That's a lot of savings, right? And so looking for those areas, just being proactive, are what I've observed and what I would try to mimic back to everyone else.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I think
I agree with Alex for sure. One thing that we've done in Garland just this school year, we've consolidated 9 routes, and we're always looking just where can we adjust and save, because 1, fuel is expensive, 2, we could utilize that driver elsewhere, and 3, we here in Garland do have an aging fleet, and so we have a handful of buses that we've had to take out of service. So it's been one of those where we again have been creative of where we can make that adjustment and utilize our resources more appropriate.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Jasmine, in the way in which you describe it, which is, I think a lot of times when people think about efficiency, it might be tied to sacrifice. And it's not always that way. It's sometimes that budget and funding are just facilitators to help you think differently about what's possible. And the way you describe the optimizations, you would call them optimizations in Garland. You're able to move some buses out of service that needed to go out of service. You were able to put routes so that you could reduce a couple of routes and be more efficient. One would argue if someone gave you twice as much money, you would still want an outcome like that. So I think it's important for all of us to think about, I often use this example as a marketer. What do I do? Like, I spend a lot of money. That's like my job in a business. And it's not, what would you do if you had $10 million? It's like, what is the absolute best way to reach the people that matter most and figure out how to do that efficiently? And it feels like you guys have offered real examples here that are not sacrifice, but instead opportunities to think differently about how you solve the day-to-day challenges.
Optimization. Yeah.
So we'll go with, I'll float out one question, but I think hopefully, we started at the top of this call today talking about what are some of the macro trends that are driving the way in which districts are thinking about next year planning across every function. We are talking about how the operations within any school district are subject to said budgets, and how do we find opportunities for efficiency and optimization in every stage of what we're working on. And we talked about relative to transportation. How is transportation something that can be thought of as an accelerator and being brought into processes early, whether it is in partnership with a finance team, or it is in partnership with a special services team, or with an MKV liaison organization? How do we do those things soon? And then we'll leave with like taking action now. You may be well down the path, which is you think your plan's rock solid. If you leave this conversation today, maybe use this as a pressure test. Have I brought in all the appropriate stakeholders to put a stamp of confidence that the plan we're putting forward is reflective of anticipated change and student outcomes? And if not, what can we do? We can look for places where the mode may not match the need. What are modifications that can still be made to achieve the optimizations we talked about? And how do we stay prepared? How do we always say, what does everybody subscribe to? What is the outcome? What is the measure? What does good look like if we do this well at the end of the year? With the objective being, when you can prove value and show success, it is the surest path to securing more budget when needed. So with that, I don't know if there are any parting comments Alex, Carlos, or Jasmine would want to offer to our audience today.
I think I should yield some time back to the experts here, Carlos and Jazz, for their final send off. But just echoing the themes that they've shared: proactivity, flexibility, creating a plan in advance, and having a partner to rely on, making service consistent. These are themes and tracks that lead to optimization and efficiency, right? Which those are cost saving measures, we know.
I'll echo something that Jasmine mentioned, which you finally could get on. I wish you would have been on here longer with us, but she mentioned the students, she mentioned the kids, and I think as that continues to be our driving force, we understand that we're talking about dollars, budget, but really the reason when we talk about that is so that we can focus most of the instructional monies towards instruction, right? So that those kids in the classroom can have the resources that they need, so the teachers are taken care of, So although we look at transportation like as a support department, it is integral when we talk about our mission. Each district has spelled out differently, but it always involves student achievement, student learning. So the decisions we make, regarding transportation, those services, absolutely impact the resources that are at the disposal of the district. So we always got to keep that in mind.
Please. About the educational experience, very well said, and a really good concluding point, Carlos. So I realize we are at the top of the hour, so or sort of at the top of the hour plus 1 minute. I want to thank our presenters. Discussions like these are highly dependent on willingness of participants to be really candid, and you guys were really candid in sharing challenges you're facing, solutions you identified. I'm confident our audience found that really helpful. I thank the three of you very much for your time. If you've submitted a question here that we have not addressed within our dialogue today, please know we will follow up with you directly. And thank you to the district administration team for supporting us and being a great partner when it comes to joining these programs and talking about a variety of topics.
Perfect. Likewise. And I'll just say a few things before we close out. So just want to thank all of you for your time here today, for leading us through this great conversation, which is so important to our audience. But to you, our audience, I'm going to just push a few things onto your screen. I mentioned it at the top of the hour earlier. You should now see it on your screen, just some related content that you can click on before logging off. And that includes the 2026-27 budget survey, the state of student transportation, as well as if you want to connect with our sponsors at EverDriven, there's a link in there too as well. So just take a few moments for that. And before I go through my closing slides, I am also pushing on to your screen the post-event survey. We just love to hear your thoughts on what you thought about this presentation, as well as just where you are in your current process in dealing with these budget pressures and transportation. So just take a few moments for that. We'd appreciate it. But I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today as well. For those of you who enjoyed what you saw, we have more webinars like this one that are provided by us here at DA, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, trends, as well as current issues in K-12. And like I said earlier, we at DA will be sending you a link to the on-demand recording, the slides. So just look out for that in your inboxes. And like Courtney was saying, if we didn't get to your, if you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, we at DA will be sharing them with our sponsors at EverDriven so they can get back to you after this call here. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again to our sponsors at EverDriven. This was great.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.